Hi there and welcome back to another NJS instructional video. In this video I'm going to show you how to smoke pulled pork on a Kamado barbecue. Now we are almost 4 hours into this cook, however it didn't start here, so let me take you back to yesterday where it all started, in the kitchen. Welcome back to the night before. We have here our pork roast that we'll be using for the pulled pork. Now this is a shoulder roast with the bone out. Now this is a supermarket grade piece of meat. However, I do find that the Coles pork is actually very good. Now we will take it out of the packaging and rinse it under some cold tap water. After that, we'll give it a pat dry all over and then prepare it for our rub. And if there's any trimming that we have to do, we'll also do it just before we put on our rub. However, I do find with cuts like this that generally we don't have to trim off too much. Now this weighs in at just over 2 kilos or around that 4.5 pound mark. Now before we apply our dry rub, we're just going to have a look at the meat and just see if there's any trimming that needs to take place. Now I do find that you probably don't want to trim too much of the fat off, because as that fat cooks, it will actually render down and give you a really nice juicy end result. However, if there is any hard fat, you can remove that, because hard fat generally doesn't render down. Now obviously this pork has been deboned, which is why we've got 2 halves. But that also gives us a really good opportunity to dry rub the inside and get that flavor on the inside of the meat as well. Now I will leave the fat or the skin here on top. When we do go to pull our pork, we'll probably remove that and discard it. And you can see that it has been scored from the packaging. We didn't do any additional scoring. So that'll allow the fat to render down a little bit further as well. Now, before we start dry brining, I'm not going to use any binder. Now you can use mustard, you can use oil, you can even use water, which is kind of what we've got here. And it gives a bit of a sticky surface from what we did before, and that is more than sufficient to hold the dry rub onto the meat. So I'll transfer the pork onto a tray, and that way as we dry rub, it'll contain it within that tray. And for our dry rub, I'll be using the Houston's Barbecue Pork Rub. Now we'll do the inside first. That way we can get the flavor all over the inside there. And you can be quite liberal with the rub itself. And I'll just do the same on the other half, like that. I'm just going to bring the 2 halves together. And I'm just going to pat in the rub. And I'm just going to transfer it onto a bread rack like this. Like that, and we'll do some of the sides. There's no real need to do the top. We will add a little bit to the top there. However, that will come off anyway. Now this pork shoulder is ready to go in the refrigerator ahead of tomorrow's cook. Now I do like dry rubbing or even dry brining my meats at least one night before the cook, and I find that allows the rub to actually penetrate into the meat and give it a really nice flavor. And the reason we've put on a bread rack, so as it refrigerates overnight, any juice that does come off, it will spill into the tray and the meat is off that, so it won't actually wet the meat and then wash away that dry rub. Now it is the morning of our cook, so let's have a quick look at how I've set up the charcoal in the Kamado before we start firing up. Now I've half filled our Kamado with some premium quality lump charcoal, and I'm using the Pro Smoke lump charcoal, which I find burns hot, it burns long, there's low ash, and it gives a good flavor as well to the food. And I've kind of bundled the charcoal so it's higher here in the middle, and that's where we'll start our fire. And I've also kept the periphery clear of charcoal, and that'll ensure we get really good air into our fire and have a nice clean burning fire. And I'll also be using some apple smoking wood chunks for this cook, which I'll place on top of the charcoal once we've lit it. So let's grab our luft lighter and fire up the charcoal. And we'll place our heat deflector stones, our water and drip pan, and also our cooking grate back on the Kamado. We'll open the top and bottom vents fully, close the lid, and let our Kamado come up to a temperature of around 120 degrees Celsius or around 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, as the temperature starts climbing in our Kamado, as we get that heat soak throughout the ceramic, we will start closing off those vents so we don't overshoot that temperature mark. And I'll place our smoking chunks as well on the grate, and that's so we can preheat them so when we do put them on the fire, they combust and give a nice clean burn. Now we'll give our Kamado some time to heat soak, and this might take anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 or sometimes even longer. It all depends on that fire that you built into the Kamado at the start. And what we're looking for is some really good heat soak throughout the ceramic and also a temperature of around 120 degrees Celsius. Now it's been 20 minutes since we lit the fire and our Kamado is already at 120 degrees Celsius. So I've just backed off the bottom and the top vents considerably to hold that temperature. Now we'll place our smoking chunks on top of the fire. We'll put our stones back, our drip pan, which will also fill up with a little bit of water to keep the environment in the Kamado moist, and that'll help the smoke adhere to the surface of our meat. And then we'll shortly start cooking. Now that we've added the smoking chunks and the water in the Kamado, it will take a little bit to get back to that temperature of 120 degrees, so we'll give it about another 5 minutes. Now I have taken our pork out of the refrigerator, and this is a result of the overnight dry rub. And the way you see it here is the way we'll place it on our Kamado. We'll make sure that the thicker part is towards the back, because that's generally where it's hotter in our Kamado. For a low and smoke cook like this, I take the meat out of the refrigerator probably about 5 to 10 minutes before we actually start cooking. And I do find that having the meat cold will also give us a better smoke profile and better smoke ring. However, it does depend on what you're trying to cook. So say for example, it was steaks. I would like to temper the meat probably about an hour or so before we start cooking. Now it's been 30 minutes since we started the fire and it's roughly 8 o'clock in the morning. So we'll place our pork onto our Kamado. We do have good heat soak. We do have a good temperature. And we'll try and place our pork as centered as possible and keep it all together in one piece. Now a quick overview of today's cook. So at 7:30 in the morning we started the fire, and at about 7:50 we place our smoking chunks on top of the fire. We also place some water in our drip pan, and at about 8 o'clock or 30 minutes after the fire had started, it was ready to put our pork on the Kamado, and we have good heat soak and a good temperature. Now for the first 2 hours of our cook, we won't open the lid at all. We'll let that pork smoke in our Kamado. And for every hour after that, up until the 4-hour mark, we'll check our pork. We'll start probing at about the 3 to 4 hour mark. And very likely at the 4-hour mark, we'll probably hit an internal temperature of around 60 to 70 degrees Celsius of our pork. It's very likely that it'll be ready to wrap. Now I'll be using a foil wrap because that's what I've found gives really good results with this particular cook. Now we won't be spritzing our pork at all. I do find by adding water in our drip pan that it does create that nice humid environment to prevent any drying out and also for that smoke to penetrate deep into the meat. Now I anticipate at the 7-hour mark, our pork will reach that desired internal temperature. And today we're targeting around 95 degrees Celsius. Now whilst the internal temperature is important, we'll also probe it for tenderness and make sure that we have the right tenderness and consistency throughout our pork. And after we pull our pork off the Kamado, we'll let it rest for about 1 hour. And after that, we'll open it up, we'll sauce it, and then it'll be ready to serve. We have just hit over the 2-hour mark and our Kamado is holding a really nice stable temperature at just shy of 120 degrees Celsius, around 240 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we haven't seen the pork yet, so let's open up, have a look, and also start probing it for internal temperature. Around 52.5 degrees. 46, 49. So we'll give it another hour before we check again for internal temp. We are fast approaching the 3-hour mark. Again, our Kamado is holding a really nice stable temperature of around 120 degrees, so 250 degrees Fahrenheit. It's time to check the internal temperature of our pork. Nearly 60 degrees Celsius there. Nearly 59. And we've got about 63 degrees towards the back. Now we'll let the pork smoke for another hour, and that'll bring us to the 4-hour mark. Now it's been about 4 hours that our pork has been smoking in the Kamado, so let's have a look at it and also measure its internal temperature. Now our pork is looking really good and it's taken on a nice mahogany colour. So let's just quickly check the internals. Around 64 there. Around 66 there. Around 65. So we are getting that consistent temperature throughout. Just do one more over here. Around 66 degrees Celsius. Now we're ready to wrap this pork. So we've wrapped the pork pretty tight in the foil, and we have left just a little bit uncovered there, which will help any excess steam and juice come out. I do find that this cook and this method results in a very, very juicy pork, and probably you get a bit too much of the juice towards the end. So just leaving a little pocket like that will just help reduce that a little bit more. So we'll place that back on the Kamado. We'll let this cook for another 3 hours, and then check the internal temperature again at that 7-hour mark. Now we're almost at the 7-hour mark, and our Kamado is showing a nice stable temperature of 120 degrees Celsius or 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we did have some rain, so I have opened up the top and the bottom vents just that slightly more, just to help maintain that temperature inside the Kamado. So let's have a look at our pork and measure the internal temperature. So about 89, almost 90 degrees Celsius through the middle there. About 93 approximately there. About 90 degrees Celsius there. So we'll give this another half an hour and then check the internal temperature again. Now it's been another 30 minutes, so we're at the 7.5-hour mark. So let's check our pork and check the internal temperature. $95, 99, that's good, 97, 93. So in different areas of the pork, it is probing a little bit different. It's got a good tenderness as well as I was putting in that probe. Now we'll pull our pork, and pardon the pun, we'll let it rest for about an hour at room temperature, and we'll give it a cover with the tea towel as well. It's now the moment of truth. We'll shortly uncover our pork and pull it all apart. Now we'll be finishing off our pulled pork with some Jack Daniel's barbecue honey sauce. And as you can probably see, we do have a bit of a lake of juice all around our pork. So we will pop that so all the juice spills into the tray. We will take the fat cap off, and then we'll start shredding our pork. And that's shredding nice and easily. Now I do kind of like my pulled pork a bit chunkier. so not overly shredded. And that's just a matter of not shredding it as much, not necessarily the tenderness. You can probably see as well that nice pink colour. That's our smoke ring from the apple smoking chunks. Let's give it a taste test. Cheers. That is really good and really, really juicy and really tender. So let's go in for another piece. That is a really nice pulled pork. Now it is the following day and it's time for our post-cook review. So first, let's open up our Kamado. We have our grates, we'll just take them off. And our drip pan has caught pretty much all of the fat drippings and anything else that's come off. And that's also helped keep clean our half deflector stones. Having a look now at our charcoal, we can actually see we've still got about half a piece of our smoking chunks. Now I do need to clarify something. I did say earlier on in this video that they were apple smoking chunks, and as I was eating the pork last night, I realized that they're actually cherry. So that's a cherry smoking chunk. So we've got about half of the each, so we put 2 in total. Now you can see a lot of our charcoal is still well and truly intact. It just testifies to the thermal efficiency of our Kamado, and also that it's a good quality lump charcoal that we've used. And just give this a quick clean. And we still have a considerable amount of charcoal left in our Kamado, and that's more than enough for another cook, be that a hot and fast or low and slow as well. And as you could see, as we're uncovering the pork, there was so much juice within that foil. So we had a really juicy result in the end, very tender, very delicious. And I think that barbecue sauce that we used also worked out really well, complementing the meat. We did have a nice hint of smoke flavour, nothing overpowering, but it also did give us that nice reddish cherry kind of look on our meat. So that's all for our post-cook review. So there you have it. That's how you can make an incredible pulled pork on a Kamado ceramic barbecue. I really hope you found this video informative. Don't forget to like it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit that bell notification icon. Thanks for watching.